We decided to start MyHealthTeams after doing research amongst patients with chronic conditions. And we found that when people get a chronic condition, they're diagnosed with something like multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, they all go to Google. And they search Dr. Google and they find a whole bunch of information that's interesting and relevant and a whole bunch that's scary. And what they really want to do is be able to connect with others who get it. Not their Facebook friends don't get what it's like to have rheumatoid arthritis or MS or epilepsy. And so it was really about seeing this huge need to connect people with others who get it. And it turns out that in most developed countries, like in the United States, 1 in 2 people have a chronic condition. So it seemed like a big need that we could serve. So the question around why is MyHealthTeams growing so much? We've got about 1.5 million members now, and I think there's a few reasons why it's growing so quickly. First and foremost is just this need to connect with others who understand what you're going through. You know, you see your doctor maybe once every 3 months, but they don't, they can't provide those day-to-day questions you have when you have a chronic condition. The second is that you want to be in a place that's authentic. It's just for you. And so we developed each social network for each condition because of that. So my autism team is just for parents of individuals with autism. My breast cancer team is just for women with breast cancer. So it feels safer than, say, a Facebook and connects you with other people who are going through the same thing. So we partner with pharmaceutical companies in 3 ways. The first is to truly understand what consumers who happen to be diagnosed with a chronic condition need and what they're thinking about. We've found that a lot of times pharmaceutical marketers and pharmaceutical even R&D folks rely on doctors or key opinion leaders to come up with the priorities for patients. But oftentimes what a KOL says and a doctor says is different from what actual patients might say. So the value for the members is getting their voice heard directly by the pharmaceutical companies so that they can understand what their needs are. So a lot of the research we do with pharma companies comes in the form of listening to the conversations on our social network, as well as surveying people on the social network to understand their needs. The second thing we then do is try to meet their needs with patient resources. So we partner with pharmaceutical companies to do disease state education and awareness, and other unbranded type of patient education, as well as branded patient education. So if you have been diagnosed and you've been prescribed a drug like, say, Humira, you could come to the social network and learn about what copay assistance is available for that particular drug. So the third way we partner with pharma companies is on clinical trial recruitment and actually getting input from members on how to design a trial. So those 3 ways, the research, the patient education, the clinical trial recruitment, I think all are things that we can be proud of in serving our members because it's in their best interest too. Yeah, it's really critical to engage patients at all stages of R&D, all stages of the life cycle of a drug. And it's really, healthcare is kind of the last industry that has really surrounded themselves with the consumer and tried to put them first and understand their needs. I guess if you don't ask, how do you know? Let me give an example. We have a social network called MyHealthTeams. It's for people diagnosed with hemophilia and other blood disorders. And if you look at the way hemophilia has been treated in the past, it's largely been around control the bleeding, right? Control the bleeding with infused factor. But if you actually ask people with hemophilia, what impacts your day-to-day life the most? It's kind of surprising what you found. So we did this research with our members, and what we found is, sure, they say bleeds impact their day-to-day life because they've got it infused for 2 hours, but that largely works. That solves their problem. But equally impacting their day-to-day life is depression and pain from uncontrolled bleeds in the past and the mobility issues that has. And so these are folks who are getting their blood properly clotted with factor, but they're depressed, it's hard for them to leave their home, and they're in pain. So those issues are outcomes that are really important to them, and without doing that research, you may not know that, so that when you're developing your drugs, you're designing your clinical trials, you take that into account. So when it comes to interacting with B2C apps, so apps that are meant for the end user, I think there's a few do's and don'ts for pharma. The do's are engage them where they are. So it's very rare that a pharmaceutical company could build their own community that any consumer like you or I would actually go to on a regular basis. You want them to be able to go to the place where they are, so our social networks is where they're going and connecting with each other. So I think the second thing is to participate in a responsible way. So on our social networks, it's not like a pharma person can come and join it and be talking with them, but doing research through that third party. When we do that research with a pharma partner, it's all de-identified, it's all consented. And it's a way for them to hear unfiltered truth, but private, de-identified and private information. And I think the third thing is just don't limit the conversation. What I think gets in the way of a lot of community efforts started by pharma companies is they're usually like, yeah, but you can't talk about our drug here, because then you might talk about adverse events, and that's a bad thing. So I actually think that people talking about adverse events about your drug is the best thing that could ever happen for a pharma company, because they're usually talking about how they cope with that side effect and how they stay on the drug. So it does mean you need to do things like adverse event reporting. With our partners, we just do that adverse event reporting for them so that it removes that hurdle from them actually engaging those patients directly. It's a great question. What we've found is when you lead with the social, meaning they come to your website, they come to your social network, these users, so that they can engage with each other. Just get out of their way and let them do that. When you do that, they end up sharing an enormous amount of information about them, just like you or I might on our Facebook profile or our LinkedIn profile, except here it's all information about their condition. And the reason they're sharing that is not because they want to do science. It's because they want to find other people exactly like them. So we think about the data they share there as sacrosanct, it is private. We never want to do anything that would belie their trust in us. But what we also think about it as is it's another indicator of what is relevant to them. And if you want to be relevant, you need to understand, like if I'm reaching out to you about Remicade, for example, but you've already developed the antibodies to Remicade, well, that would be a waste of your time. It wouldn't be targeted and relevant. And I think this form of real-world evidence is different than the typical clinical trial, outcomes measures. You're looking at really how people are impacting, how it's impacting their life on a day-to-day basis. That's pretty critical.